All right, it is 7:01. We are going to get started, everyone. I want to thank you for being here tonight. If you want, you can put in the chat where you're from. Sometimes we get people from around the world. That's kind of cool. And I'm really pleased to be here tonight with Dr. Kristen Schraben.
Got it.
Very phonetic name. And one of her posts caught my eye back in, was it April maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've shared those materials a few times now, I think, over the past couple of years.
And so I thought, I'm going to reach out to this interesting person. And sure enough, we connected. And so she is here tonight with us. And let me introduce her, and then she's going to take it away. There will be time for Q&A at the end. Put your questions in the chat, and then we'll take care of it from there. All right. So Dr. Kristen Schraben is an associate professor of psychology and director of the School of Psychology in Michigan. Director of the School of Psychology graduate program at Grand Valley State University, and that's in Michigan, correct? Right?
Yes.
She is a nationally certified school psychologist and an Acadience reading mentor with experience in schools in Michigan and Florida. She teaches undergraduate courses in special education and graduate courses in intellectual and academic assessment. And without further ado, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I see a couple Michigan people in the chat. Happy to see some Michiganders in there. I know you guys are in the same time zone as me, at least.
Right.
I shared it once already. I'm going to share, I have a handout, to accompany the presentation, especially for all the hyperlinks I'm going to share at the end. I want you guys to have access to those. And I will, Donna's going to make sure if you're watching the recording later that the handout will be attached when the recording is sent out. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen with my PowerPoint and get us started. All right, everybody can see the PowerPoint okay?
Yep.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm really excited. Thank you, Donna, for the introduction. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It is something that I actively teach my graduate students, but it's also something I've tried to address through some collaborations with local school districts in Michigan. I've done some form of this presentation a couple of times. As Donna said, I've shared some of the slides you've seen today. Might look familiar if you've accessed some of the materials I've shared on the Science of Reading Facebook page, because I've shared bits and pieces of this in various forms there as well. So again, my goal today is really to talk about how we can move away from using the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment system and reading levels for screening large numbers of students and for monitoring the progress of students. And to move away from that, I want to propose a much better alternative, and that being curriculum-based measurement. I have my email address here on this slide. I also have it again towards the end. If there's a question that you have that we don't get to today and you want to send me an email afterwards, I would be happy to follow up with anybody who wants more information or needs additional resources or other talking points to take back to your district. I'm happy to continue to have conversation about this topic. Like I said, it is one I love to talk about. One thing you'll see here on this first slide are a lot of the kind of books that sort of have inspired my teaching of my graduate students and kind of bits and pieces I've taken to form parts of this presentation. So there's some great books on curriculum-based measurement out there. There's also great books on academic skill problems and academic interventions and how to monitor their progress. You may recognize some of the names of the authors of them, of those books there. So those are some of my favorite texts that I keep on my shelf in my office and I constantly pull out and reference or loan out to students who want to learn more about this topic beyond what I teach them in class. So as Donna said, she gave a great introduction to kind of who I am. I'm not sure if there's any other school psychologists on the Zoom today. Let me know if you're a school psych in the chat. I'd love to see that you're there. It is School Psychology Awareness Week, so it's a great week for me to do a presentation like this. And so Donna kind of talked about all kind of my qualifications and where I work right now, the one thing I do want to mention before I jump into this is my role as a Acadience reading mentor. I'm going to talk today about several different kind of publishers of curriculum-based measures, and I will share some specific examples from Acadience reading, and that's simply because they're the measures I know the best as a mentor. I am not a salesperson for Acadience Learning. I'm not here to sell you on their measures. I don't get a commission from people who sign up. My mentor status simply means that I've gone through the training so that I can train others in Acadience. So again, I won't be getting too much into the nuts and bolts of actual administration today, but I will be using several elements of Acadience to as examples through today. So know that again, I don't have any financial stake in Acadience. It just happens to be something that I am a trainer for. So again, my goal for this evening, I want to briefly talk about kind of the different purposes of assessment and how curriculum-based measure may fit into kind of this model of assessment within a school-wide literacy model. Then I want to talk about sort of the what and the why of curriculum-based measure. What is it and why might you want to go this direction? What are some great reasons why you might choose this over using like the F&P BAS system? I also want to talk about just some of the practicalities and logistics of actually using curriculum-based measurement in a school. Again, I won't have time to get into all the nuts and bolts of how to administer, how to score, how to interpret the data, because that is going to vary a lot depending on which curriculum-based measures you use, as well as the specific scoring rules for the different probes. So it is going to vary a lot. If people have interest in that and have specific questions about that, I'm happy to address those at another time. But I want to think more big, broader picture here. How can we utilize curriculum-based measures in a school and answer a couple really common questions I get related to this topic? And then when we wrap up towards the end, I have several slides, two kind of detailed slides of resources related to this topic that I want to make sure I share. And I'll highlight a couple of the really great things that they provide so that if you want to learn more beyond today, then you'll be able to also go back and access those resources. Again, the handout, if you've been in the chat already, when I shared the handouts there, Donna will also send out the handout when she sends out the recording. You'll be able to click on all the links so you don't have to copy and paste them. And like Donna said, I should have some time for questions at the end. Okay, so starting to dive into the different purposes of assessment. These are sort of the four main purposes or reasons why you might be doing assessment when you think about sort of a school-wide literacy model. So I'm going to be focusing mainly on screening and progress monitoring today, but I want to kind of talk about all four briefly, just to kind of wrap our heads around different ways we might utilize assessment. And I know we have people in a variety of roles here on the Zoom today, so I want to make sure, I kind of highlight maybe bits and pieces that might be part of your role. So first we have screening, right? This is something we do with a large number of students. Many schools, I think, do screening for reading at least kindergarten through second grade. I know many schools that I'm around in Michigan do kindergarten through sixth grade. You may be working at a middle school or high school that is still doing, reading screenings. You may also have screenings for other areas. But what we know is that these screenings, right, we need to assess a large number of students in an efficient way, right? Typically screenings are done, 3 times a year, or if you have, once a marking period, but I think 3 times a year is a pretty typical time frame for in terms of screening. When we think about picking an assessment for screening, we want to make sure, again, that something that is brief, right, that we can do efficiently with a large number of individuals. We want something that is standardized, that is given the same way to every single child that we screen, something that has validity and reliability to actually be used as a screening measure, and that it's going to happen to help us accurately identify those students that might be at risk, right? Those students who might struggle that we might need to dig a little deeper into. It is not meant to tell us every single thing about a student's reading skills, right? That's not the goal of screening. It's to help us very quickly and broadly look at a large number of students and say, these kids are on track and these kids we might need to dig deeper into, right? These kids might need additional support. That's where diagnostic assessment comes in, right? And some people see that term diagnostic assessment and they think diagnosis, like, are we deciding if a kid has dyslexia or a disability of some kind? And diagnostic actually means something slightly different when you think about a school-wide literacy model. When we think about diagnostic assessment, these are assessments that help us dig much deeper into a student's skills and help us figure out, what do I actually have to teach next, right? Diagnostic assessments are typically less standardized, less strict in terms of their administration and scoring rules. They oftentimes are much lengthier, right? It takes a lot more time to administer diagnostics. The core phonics survey would be one example of a diagnostic assessment. And again, it's now we're digging deeper into a subset of students. We're not doing a diagnostic with every single child, but we're digging deeper into learn more detail about what these students' struggles are and what skills do they have and what skills do I need to teach them next. Okay. I could see some aspect of running records being helpful here as sort of part of maybe your diagnostic, right? Hearing a student read aloud and listening for the types of errors they're making, not MSV queuing, right? But looking at the types of words that they struggle with and their phrasing, and if they're making lots of mistakes, that could be helpful, right? And help you learn more about what you need to do next instructionally. So I could see, sort of an element, right, of running record kind of working there. But we think about progress monitoring. Now we want to know, is our instruction actually working? Are these supplemental supports or interventions we're putting in place actually helping students improve? This is, again, needs to be brief, because we don't want to take a ton of time away from instruction for these students that are struggling, but we want a way to track their progress over time and figure out if what we're doing is actually making a difference or not. Right? We want to be able to make changes if what we're doing is not working. We don't want to go an entire marking period or entire benchmark window before we find out if what we're doing is actually helping the student improve. And so progress monitoring is very important, right? It's also essential that that be a standardized tool that is administered the same way to everybody, that is also brief and efficient. And then for progress monitoring, we also want a tool that has multiple equivalent forms, so that we can, again, monitor the student's progress repeatedly over time, but not worry about practice effects, right? We want to be able to have equivalent forms of the same assessment that we can use over time. Outcome assessment, I'm not going to talk a ton about, right? Outcome evaluation would be kind of where your statewide assessments sort of come in, right? That is looking at over the course of the entire year, how have students done in these areas, right? We're looking at broader outcomes. And because those are only done once a year, right? It's not a screening tool. It's not a progress monitoring tool. It's just looking at after the course of this year of instruction, how are our students doing? And that's important data to look at as well. But ideally, we have screening data that can help us predict how students are going to do on those outcome evaluations, on those statewide tests, so that it's not a big surprise come at the end of the year. And we've worked really hard along the way to try and help students succeed. So again, today I'm mainly focusing on screening and progress monitoring and how curriculum-based measures really fit into those particular purposes. So what is a curriculum-based measurement, right? So when CBMs, or curriculum-based measure, was first developed, what we kind of call the true or the original CBM, it truly was individuals sampling directly from the curriculum that they were teaching from, which means that it was directly linked to the curriculum your school was using. And so if your school used a different curriculum than another school, you might have different CBMs, right, that you were utilizing. But that was a lot of work, right? A ton of work in terms of the individuals who were trying to do this. Very difficult to create true random sampling of equal difficulty of what you were trying to teach across the curriculum. So really what shifted and what happened is that we had kind of researchers and then publishers come in and create some CBM tools that are free from a particular curriculum in a school, right? Now what we have are research CBMs or published CBMs that, again, I'll give lots of examples today of some really popular ones and some that are freely available for you to access. But the idea here is that these research CBMs, again, are not necessarily linked to the specific curriculum of your school, but are looking at key skills that we want students to acquire across a grade level and that measure, right, those skills over the course of a year, that they are sensitive to actual change and growth and improvement. So they can be used both to screen students for skills, but they can also be used to track progress over time. Because these measures have been researched, they've already done all the hard work for you, right? They've been shown to be reliable and valid for these purposes, to identify students who struggle accurately, to monitor progress over time and see improvement over time. So they've done all that hard work, right? You don't have to design your own. And again, they're not linked to a particular curriculum, so anybody can use these across the board. These types of curriculum-based measurements, or CBMs, are also called general outcome measures, right? Again, we're looking at a general outcome, a way to look at student skills across the year. And so instead of looking at, did they master this skill? Did they master this skill? Did they master this skill? We're looking at overall, here's a skill we know we work on the entire year. How is the student doing across the year? Which allows us to monitor the student's progress over time. When I was putting together this presentation, I found this great resource from the Iris Center through Vanderbilt. This is one of their information briefs, and they had this great kind of information about progress monitoring and mastery measurement versus general outcome measurement. Many of the teachers in this group are probably very familiar and comfortable with the idea of mastery measurement. A lot of the tests that you have that are kind of built into your core curriculum, right? You teach a unit, you test the students. You teach a unit, you test the students. That is really a mastery measurement. You are assessing students on skills or information that they're learning in the curriculum. You have the, the results are easily available to you. You can test the students as frequently as you need to when you finish a unit. And you can use it to evaluate if your instruction is effective. But it's not a general outcome measure, right? Because we don't use the same test multiple times across the year, right? We test them on one thing, they've mastered it, we move on. We test them on one thing, they've mastered it, we move on. And so they don't have alternative tests of equivalent difficulty, they have different tests for different units. So again, these CBMs we're talking about today are really general outcome measurement, right? They are, again, free of a particular curriculum. They're not assessing mastery of a certain skill and then moving on. They're looking at a skill that's designed to be acquired across the entire year so that we can identify students who are not making progress and students who might need additional support, and then to track their progress over time. Another key difference between mastery measurement and general outcome measurement is that general outcome measures are going to predict performance on those standardized achievement tests. So again, your statewide test that happens at the end in the spring. General outcome measures, again, have great data and research to back them up in terms of being able to predict performance on those other measures that we know are a high stakes test that has a lot of weight when it comes to schools. So CBMs, we'll come back a little bit more about this. So one way to think about CBMs, are to describe them as academic thermometers. I can't take credit for that analogy, okay? I learned that one from Dr. Stephanie Stoller. She is the one who trained me when I first became an Acadience reading mentor, and she talked a lot about that when it came to Acadience, but this is really true of all curriculum-based measures. They are designed to be an academic thermometer. So think about the way a thermometer works, right? With COVID, we got used to using thermometers a lot. And a thermometer, right, could be used to screen a large number of students. It is a standardized way to check the temperature of a large group of people if we need to, and to check and see, do we have any sign that the person is sick or are they okay, right? Do they have a temperature, a fever, or do they not, right? Now, that doesn't mean there won't be a few false positives in the mix, right? But that's okay. What we know is that, again, this is a standard. It's standardized across everyone. It's given the same way to everyone. It can help us very efficiently figure out, does this kid maybe need some digging deeper, or is this a kid who's on track? A thermometer, right, is not going to tell you why the kid is sick, what their illness is. It's not going to tell you what kind of treatment they need. Just like CBMs are not going to tell you every single thing you need to know about a student's reading skills to plan your instruction, but it is one quick, reliable check of a student's skills that tell us who's good and who do we need to follow up with. And we can also use an academic thermometer or a regular thermometer to monitor progress over time. Once we put treatments in place, once we put interventions in place, once we make modifications to our instruction, we could use something like a thermometer to track the student's fever over time and see if what we're doing is actually working, right? So again, it's just a great kind of analogy to think about what CBMs are designed to do and what they're not designed to do. Again, they are not going to dig deeper and tell you everything that a diagnostic assessment would possibly tell you about a student's skills and what they need to learn next. But instead, they are going to, again, give us an efficient way to screen a large number of students and monitor progress over time. So curriculum-based measures are, again, they're standardized. They are given the same way to everybody. They are scored the same way for everybody. And that also allows us to have a normative sample or a research target goal, right, that we can compare a student's skills to. And again, they're designed to be simple and short so that we can use them efficiently with large numbers of students and not take a lot of time away from instruction. Most curriculum-based measures in terms of screening would take you, 5, probably no more than 10 minutes per student, and that's on the long end, right? So no more than 10 minutes per student. Most of the time it would be less than that. When we're talking about progress monitoring, right, if you're just doing one measure, that's typically going to take you 2 minutes maximum, okay? If you compare that to the amount of time it takes to administer, right, the BAS to figure out a student's reading level, if you have to do that with all the students in your class or all the students in your building, we're talking about major differences in time taken away from instruction to administer those assessments. So this is one major way that they differ, is the time needed to administer, right? Curriculum-based measures are designed to be much more efficient and give us, again, a little snapshot of the student's skills so that we can inform some curricular changes. Again, they're designed to be repeated and sensitive to improvement. They come with equivalent forms so that you can give the same measure, but different forms of it over time and not really worry about the student having practice effects or I've read this story before, I've memorized this story before, that we know that the student is going to have equivalent forms and we can sample their behavior over time. Again, we are sampling a behavior or a skill that we want them to learn across the whole year, right? That means we expect them to struggle or be slower or less accurate in the fall compared to then the winter. We might see some improvement, and the spring. We want to see progress over time. That's the way these measures were designed. So if a curriculum-based measure seems hard to your students in the fall, that is okay, right? It is designed, this is something we want to teach them across the whole school year. And the benchmark goal may not be that high. Students may not need to score very high in the fall to still be considered on track, but it still gives us a way to track their progress over time. This progress over time is another area where it kind of differs from your F&P BAS system and your reading levels, right? I know there's several different forms of the reading levels out there. So even if every teacher in your building was using the exact same version of the leveling system, one issue you run into with using reading levels for tracking progress over time is that F&P levels are ordinal data, not equal interval data. That means going from A to B is good, right? Going from C to D level is good, but the same amount of growth to go from A to B may not be the same amount of growth needed to go from C to D, right? So it doesn't allow us to reliably track how much progress students are making in any given period, because the students may be making a lot of growth to go from A to B and not as much growth to go from C to D. So that's one kind of major issue with using F&P levels specifically to monitor progress, is because you have a lot of variation in the level to level changes that, again, are going to make it difficult to reliably track your students' progress. So the what I have here in the green box are some examples of curriculum-based measures, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just an example list. I mentioned, right, that I'm most familiar because I'm a trainer for the Acadience reading assessments out of Acadience Learning. They also make math measures, right, but I won't focus on that today. Acadience reading measures are very similar to DIBELS 8, right? Acadience reading used to be DIBELS Next before they kind of and then they broke off. So those those kind of were both in one and the same back when I was in graduate school, and now have branched out to be 2 different assessments, but there is quite a bit of overlap. You also have Easy CBM. The great thing about Acadience Reading, Dibbles 8, and Easy CBM is you can try out all of those totally for free. Okay, you can download them as PDFs and you can try them, which would be a great option if after today you say, I want to go and I want to pilot this, right, with a small group of students, or I want to pilot this and try it out with my class, right, or I want to introduce this to my administrator. You can have access to those materials for free to try them out or check them out. They all do have pay options as well, especially if you want to use their data management system or any of their online, all the online resources that they come with, some of their goal setting technology, then you do have, a pay option. But Acadience Learning, Dibbles 8, and Easy CBM are all free if you just want to try it out in the paper pencil version. FastBridge, as far as I know, FastBridge is not free. They have some computer-based assessments, but they also have CBMs, but I'm fairly certain when I checked, you have to pay for access to all of those. Intervention Central also has some freely available curriculum-based measures. They don't have as exhaustive of an inventory, but you can download them directly from their website. And they've got a lot of great resources on there as well. So yeah, I really love the instruction pieces from Intervention Central too, Susan. So, okay. So the next thing I just wanted to show you is I wanted to take some of those publishers of curriculum-based measures and show you how they line up with some of the big 5 reading skills, right? So again, for screening, we might be looking at multiple skills at a given grade and given time of year. And for progress monitoring, we might be digging into just kind of one area. But you'll see that a lot, right? All of these publishers provide different curriculum-based measures to align with different reading skills, right? So Acadience Reading has for sound fluency. They also have a phoneme segmentation fluency that are really screening and monitoring progress for those basic phonemic awareness skills. Then you've got your nonsense word fluencies or your letter sound fluency type measures that are looking at principal alphabetic understanding, your very basic phonics skills. Then you have the wide variety of oral reading fluency measures that are out there. Again, pretty much all the publishers, I think, of CBMs have some version of an oral reading fluency measure that is looking at the student's reading rate and accuracy. And then comprehension, there isn't quite as much variety here. Acadience Reading has a maze measure as well, but they also have a retail portion for their oral reading fluency. And then you have Easy CBM has a multiple choice reading comprehension sort of CBM. So there's a little bit, kind of differences depending on what type of very basic level comprehension you want to look at. Again, none of these are designed to be diagnostics. They're not going to tell you every single thing you need to know about a student's phonemic awareness skills. They're not going to tell you all the phonics skills that a student's mastered or which skills they need to learn next. It's not going to tell you about all the students' comprehension abilities, but it's going to help us quick see which kids are on track, which kids do I need to dig deeper into? And that's where some of your diagnostic assessments would really come in handy. So if a student gets flagged on Acadience Reading nonsense word fluency, I might want to follow up and try like a core phonics survey and see where the student skills actually breaking down. Which phonics skills do they have and where do I need to potentially start teaching them? So that's really where you start with your first level screening. You might dig deeper into diagnostics to inform your instruction, and then you can follow up with progress monitoring to see if what you're doing in your instruction or your intervention is actually making a difference. So this kind of table with this, again, these are just examples. This is not an exhaustive list. Some of the publishers have more than one measure that kind of correspond to some of the different reading skills, but they do have those as well. So here's a couple of examples. Again, these are coming from Acadience, which are freely available for you to download and utilize. So I just gave one snapshot sample of their phoneme segmentation fluency measure, which would be one of their phonemic awareness CBMs. And then here's one sample of one of their 3rd grade middle of the year benchmark screenings for oral reading fluency. So again, today I don't have the time or capacity to train you all right on how to give them, how to score them, how to interpret all the data, because that is going to vary by publisher. It's going to vary by tool, right? Phoneme segmentation fluency is scored differently than oral reading fluency. But that is something to kind of dig into deeper. Many of the publishers, they may have either online training options, they may have ability to, you could pay a trainer to come to your district, but I think many of them now are having kind of online training options or modules where you can learn about them. And some of the assessments, depending on your experience with assessment already, some of them you can even do some kind of just self-training, reading the manual yourself, kind of teaching yourself. The intervention central directions are really, really simple to follow along with. And the Acadian's reading manual, again, if you have some background in reading assessments already, it probably would not be that difficult to pick up and learn yourself. But the key here is that these are standardized. So we have to make sure that we are giving them in the standardized way and we're scoring them in the standardized way. Otherwise, they really are losing, the power that they have. So I want to highlight just a couple points of CBM research. These I found, again, from one of the IRIS modules from Vanderbilt. They have wonderful, wonderful entire modules that will walk you through from beginning to end. How do you do progress monitoring in reading, right? They'll walk you through from first looking at a student's skills to how do I decide what tool to progress monitor with? How do I set a goal for a student? How do I evaluate the effectiveness over time? They've got a whole, take you through the entire thing. If we have time at the end, I'll just pull up the site really quick and show you some of my favorites. But one box I found that I really loved was they hit a couple of the highlights of the more than 40 years of research on curriculum-based measurement. And so one of the things they talk about is how powerful this is in terms of improving achievement outcomes. Now, just administering CBMs is not going to improve achievement, right? Just doing the assessment itself is not where the magic happens, right? The magic happens where if teachers actually make instructional changes based on the CBM data, then we see huge improvements in terms of achievement. And that's across the board with students from a wide variety of kind of skill levels. Students that are high achieving, students that are average, and students that are performing lower, and even students with disabilities all make improvements in their reading achievement when teachers change and adjust their instruction based on that curriculum-based measurement data. I mentioned this earlier, right? One benefit to CBMs is that they have strong predictability for performance on standardized tests of reading, like your statewide tests. So again, there's been quite a bit of research on this. The Reschly article is a great overview of the research in this area that looks at the correlations between CBM measures, something like 1 minute oral reading fluency, and how predictive that is of how a student is going to do on the statewide test at the end of the year. So it's, again, a great option when you think about how do I get the biggest bang for my buck and the most use of my time is I can do a 1 minute timed reading of a student on a passage that's been validated for this purpose, and I can already predict how that student's going to do on the statewide test if I didn't change anything about my instruction, right? But the goal is that we're actually going to make some changes. English learners is not my particular area of expertise, but there is a growing area of research and using, again, some similar CBM type assessments with English learners. This particular study looked at students that were Spanish speaking, students that were English speaking, that were in like dual immersion kind of language programs. They used English CBMs and Spanish CBMs. And so there are some great Spanish CBMs out there. I believe Acadians used to have some French ones as well, so I'm not sure if that's still an option. But know that there are some other options out there if you do work with some English learners that you can also look into as well. That may be a great, I think that's the acronym, Ingrid, for the French one. Yes, as long as they still publish it, that's the one that I remember as well. And they have a Spanish speaking one. I just don't remember the acronym for that one. So a few kind of points of consideration of actually using CBM within a school, okay? So the first thing I want to talk about is timing. I briefly touched upon this already, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But, when you think about screening and progress monitoring and the timing of this, right, this is really going to fit into your school-wide sort of MTSS kind of literacy system. So when we think about our screening, that's really happening at the tier 1 level. We're doing that one time per term or one time per benchmark window, which usually for many schools is 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year if you're doing it for quarters. But again, we're doing that with all students just once every benchmark window. If a student is on track, if they are doing great on that screening assessment, we do not need to check them again with a CBM until the next benchmark window, right? That if they are doing great on that screening, then we should not have to check them again. That doesn't mean we don't assess their progress in other ways, right? Your curriculum may have some great mastery measurements that you're using to figure out how a student is performing, but we don't have to do another CBM screening until the next benchmark window. On the other hand, if we have students that are receiving additional supports, right, tier 2 or tier 3 additional supplemental intervention, we do not want to wait all the way until the next benchmark window to assess student progress, right? We need to assess them sooner because we need to know if what we're doing, the changes we're making, the extra supports we're putting in place is actually helping students improve. So if you have students that are receiving tier 2 level interventions, more targeted, maybe small group type interventions, ideally you want to monitor their progress maybe every other week, if not more frequently. But I'd say every other week would kind of be the minimum if you have the resources to be able to do that, so that every other week you can do a check of how is this student doing as you approach the next kind of screening window, and you can make some decisions about whether or not you want to change what's happening or intensify. If you have students that are already receiving tier 3 intensive interventions, right, things that are very individualized to them, those are the students we're most concerned about, right? Those are the students that are getting a lot of resources because we're providing them intensive interventions. We ideally should be monitoring their progress on a weekly basis, every week. Again, if you're using CBMs, that should not take a lot of time. It should be 1 to 2 minutes per student. And again, depending on how many students you have receiving tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, that may be a challenge to think about how will you fit in the time to monitor the progress of all these students. But that may also direct your attention to improving some things maybe at the tier 1 level if you have that many students that are needing additional supports. I know that's something that a lot of people in the Science of Reading Facebook group grapple with is I've got so many students needing intervention. We don't have a great tier 1 core curriculum. So I know that's something that you guys are dealing with day after day after day. But if you have students that are receiving intensive, right, and increasing intensity in interventions, we should be monitoring their progress more frequently because you're putting a lot of time and effort and resources into the progress of those students. We want to know if what we're doing is actually making a difference. Monitoring more than once a week is absolutely not necessary. These assessments, right, curriculum-based measures, are designed to be sensitive enough to actually measure progress and see it week to week to week. But you're not going to see growth if you do 2 progress monitoring probes in the same week. So you don't need to do that. I would say once a week, again, is ideal. Every other week, again, for your students that are doing tier 2, or if that's all you can manage for your students getting tier 3 intervention, that might be something that you look at as well. So one thing I get a lot of questions about is what grade level materials to use for screening and progress monitoring. And there is a difference here, right? Screening should always be done on the student's actual grade level. So if you have a second grader and you're screening them, you should be using the second grade screening materials. We want to see how that student is doing on a skill that we expect for second grade students to learn across their second grade year. Progress monitoring, on the other hand, can be done out of grade level, okay? Typically at a lower grade level for a couple particular reasons. One is you may want to choose a curriculum-based measure that is better aligned with your instructional target. So second graders, right, on something like a cadence get screened on nonsense word fluency and oral reading fluency. But maybe after you do your diagnostics, you figure out, wow, this student is still struggling with phonemic awareness skills. That's really what I'm going to be focusing on in my intervention. You may have to backtrack and use a first grade, right, progress monitoring tool that assesses phonemic awareness. Because if you're teaching phonemic awareness, we want to monitor progress on phonemic awareness. Another reason you might choose to monitor students' progress out of grade level would be is if the student's instructional level is far below the grade level that they're actually in. So if you have a fourth grader that struggles very, very bad on oral reading fluency, you may want to backtrack and see how do they do on the third grade oral reading fluency. May have to backtrack further. How do they do on the second grade oral reading fluency? May have to backtrack even further potentially if needed. Because what we know is if the student skills are here and the CBM is here, it's not going to accurately see growth over time, right? Because it's far too difficult. There's too big a gap between the students, the assessment level and the student's instructional level. By backtracking, right, we may find a level that's still going to be challenging for the student, but not so challenging that we can't actually see progress over time. So there are some resources out there to kind of give guidance. I know Acadience publishes their Acadience Reading Survey to kind of help walk you through the backwards testing, as I like to call it. But in general, a good overall rule of thumb is that you want to look for the level where the student is scoring above the 25th percentile, right? It may still be difficult for them at that level, but it's not so difficult. So ideally above the 25th percentile, if you're using something like Acadience or Dibbles that gives you benchmark goals, you might want to look for the level where the student is below benchmark, but not well below benchmark. If you're used to those benchmark goals, the student that still has some decent accuracy. So those are some general rules of thumb, but there's some other resources out there to help you kind of dig deeper. And if anyone has questions about kind of like the back testing piece, I'm happy to kind of follow up with those after as well. So, and then we actually want to use the data for instructional decision making, right? So one way I want to just show you of how you can use curriculum-based measures for really basic instructional decision-making is I want to show you the Acadience instructional grouping worksheets. Dibbles 8 makes these as well to go along with their measures. Both of them from Acadience and Dibbles are freely available on their websites. Anybody can download and access them. If you pay for access to their data systems, it will take your data and it will automatically do the groupings for you. But I wanted to walk you through an example of 3 students who have a very similar F&P reading level, but how when you look at their CBM data, it's actually much more useful in helping us figure out what level of support does a student need and what skill do they need to work on. So I want to show you kind of how you can use the instructional grouping worksheets by hand, even though they do have computerized systems that will do it for you. So first we have Shauna, okay? So Shauna's reading at an F&P level L, right? When I just look at the F&P level L, that tells me nothing about what skills she needs to work on and what level of support she's going to need. So if I gave Shauna, again, the second grade, this is second grade fall, beginning of the year assessment, I've given her nonsense word fluency and oral reading fluency from Acadience. So when I look at those scores, right, I see that she got 20 whole words read on her nonsense word fluency probe, and she got 40 words correct on her oral reading fluency. So if I follow along in the chart, that's going to show me she kind of falls, her scores put her in group 2. She is above the target benchmark goal, right? She's above where we want to see her at the beginning of second grade for her nonsense words, right? She's doing a pretty good job for the beginning of second grade in terms of being able to sound out those nonsense words and blend them back together. But she is not hitting the target goal for oral reading fluency, right? She only read 40 words correct per minute, and the target goal at that time of the year is that students are reading 52 words correct per minute. So with simple 2 1-minute timed measures, I now can kind of place Shauna in this group and see she needs additional support, right? So we may be thinking about a tier 2 type level support that is focused on fluency, right? Accurate and fluent reading of connected text. So again, if I just looked at her F&P level, I don't have that information, but you could have a teacher that could do this, right? Again, that only took maybe 3 to 4 minutes if you add in the directions to go with Shauna, 3 to 4 minutes of assessment with Shauna. I now know where she's kind of falling skill-wise, what skills she needs to work on, and what level of support she might need. Now I have Corey, also got an F&P level L. But what skill does he need to work on? What level of support does he need? So he scores a little bit differently, right? He got a nonsense word fluency score of 23 and an oral reading fluency score, words read correct, of 55. That means he hit both targets, right? So regardless of his F&P level, I can see that Corey is right on track for the beginning of second grade. He just needs to kind of keep going with regular tier 1 core instruction. We want to continue to build his fluency and comprehension because this is a skill that will continue to be worked on throughout second grade. right? But he is not a student that needs additional support. He doesn't need a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention because he's hit these research target goals. All right, then I've got my last kiddo. All right, so now I got Jenna. She's an F&P level K, so not far off from our other students. But again, what skill does she need to work on? What level of support does she need? I have to look at her Acadience data. Jenna's struggling, right? Jenna only has a nonsense word fluency score of 6 whole words read, and she's only reading about 20 words correct per minute on an oral reading fluency passage, right? So Jenna's struggling across the board, right? She needs support in both areas. But when I think about which one is the more underlying skill, Jenna is not ready to focus on fluency yet, right? If she's still struggling with decoding words, right? That nonsense word fluency is measuring her alphabetic understanding, her very basic phonics skills. I may need to dig deeper and do a diagnostic phonics assessment with Jenna to dig a little deeper and help me inform instruction she might need, what phonics skills I want to teach next. I may even want to go back a little further and just double check her phonemic awareness skills to make sure that's not a problem. But on this basic level, again, her F&P level doesn't tell me much, but this tells me that she's not hitting either of the second grade fall benchmark targets. And I need to really tackle that alphabetic principle and kind of basic phonics skills first. And given her scores and how far they are, how far below they are, she might need more intensive support, right? She might need tier 3 level support that's really going to hit those phonics skills very, very hard so that then maybe we can focus on fluency later on. So I know, Donna, you had gotten a question prior to the event that kind of asked for maybe some recommendations of language that we could use to either as part of report cards or maybe explaining skills to parents. So I tried to put together with the 3 kiddos that I just used as our samples, right, for Corey and Shauna and Jenna, I tried to put together a couple of samples of some language you might be able to use to explain, at least in words, what that curriculum-based measurement data means to parents. And you could certainly add in some of the quantitative data, right, to go along with this, right? You could put Corey's actual scores and tell parents, here's the benchmark, here's the target score we want them to reach, here's how we did. Or if you have a tool that provides percentile ranks, you could tell the parent, here's where your child scored, here's what that means. But at a very basic level, I wanted to provide some sample language of how you might explain what these data mean to parents, right? That Corey's on track. He's meeting the grade level expectations for the fall of second grade, and he likely is just going to need regular core instruction moving forward. On the other hand, Shauna is doing good with decoding skills, but she might benefit from some additional support, or if you have additional intervention, to really focus on improving her fluency of reading connected text. And Jenna is behind in multiple areas, and we really want to focus on the more underlying skill, right? We're going to focus on improving her basic phonics skills first, so that then moving forward, maybe she'll be able to be more successful with reading connected text fluently. So again, here's just kind of some sample language. Another kind of sample I wanted to provide was to think about IEP goals. I'm guessing we have some special ed teachers on the Zoom today. So I wanted to provide some examples of how you could use a curriculum-based measure to write an IEP goal that, again, you could track over time. So I do have, again, kind of a sample here. This one is also using the oral reading fluency as a sample. So you establish what the student's current level of performance is, either from your screening measure or maybe the last time you did a progress monitoring measure. So again, I use Shauna here as our example. This is, right, Shauna is currently reading 40 words correct in 1 minute. And we could set our long-term goal for her, right, is after the conclusion of 30 weeks of instruction, that she's going to be able to read 100 words correct in 1 minute. So we break down that long-term goal into short-term objectives. We say over 30 weeks, she needs to improve, right, at 2 additional words correct per minute each week to reach that long-term goal. And again, we can now track Shauna's progress every week using curriculum-based measures to see if Shauna is on track. Is she gaining those 2 additional words correct per week so that she's on track to meet that long-range target? And if she's not, we need to think about changing what we're doing to help Shauna kind of reach that goal. So there are some great resources out there for goal setting, right? The goal I came up with, Shauna, I'll show you kind of where I came up with that. But there are, some of the assessment tools, the curriculum-based measures, the publishers will have some rates of improvement readily available, already built into their assessments. If you pay for their data system, it can help set some rates of improvement or some target goals for you for students. Intervention Central has some great freely available rates of improvement that you can also utilize. You can calculate your own if you have some local norms or local benchmark goals that you want students to reach. You could calculate your own rate of improvement over time. When I was putting this together, I found this great chart, which is where I came up with the goal for Shauna. I said, I kind of set her at the ambitious growth rate, right? That at second grade, I wanted her to improve 2 words correct per minute. And so this one is from some of the founding fathers of CBMs. And they have, again, some great published data on how much growth can we expect for students as well. So that is up there. All right. So again, all of these data, right? You can have all this data in the world, but it is absolutely useless unless you're actually using it for instructional decision making. Just administering CBMs alone are not going to improve your students' reading skills. The idea here is it's going to give you helpful data to help you as a starting point and helpful data to track your students' progress over time so that you can make some instructional decisions, that you can make some instructional changes, that you can add interventions and see if they're working to actually improve outcomes for students. You can have all the data in the world. You could collect tons of data, but if you don't do anything with it, then you're not really utilizing your time really well. So make sure you're using those data for actual decision making. So my next 2 slides, right, we're going to kind of wrap up here. So if you have questions, make sure you're kind of throwing those into the chat. But I wanted to share, these are the websites for the specific curriculum-based measure tools that I talked about today as my examples. So if you wanted to look more at Acadience or Easy CBM or check out the FastBridge or Intervention Central ones, you have all of those links that are in the handout. I'm going to throw the handout one more time into the chat for people who joined us a little late. Okay. There we go. It's coming in right now. So these are all the CBM tools. These are some other related resources that if you want to dig more into this topic or learn even more beyond what I presented today. The first is a great YouTube video from Matt Burns. He has done a lot of research on the lack of evidence for F&P levels and like LLI intervention. So this is a great video where he actually summarizes some of the research on F&P and LLI. He talks about some of the studies he's done. I think the most salient study that he talks about that I have read and I make my students read is that the benchmark assessment system is about 50% accurate in helping you actually identify which kids are struggling. It's about as good as a coin flip. So again, we want to be moving towards something that's going to be much more accurate at helping us identify those kids that are struggling. But if you want to dig more into the research and hear him talk about some of the studies, that's a great YouTube video to check out. The Readings Rocket article, again, talks about some of the research. It is a really easy to read article, really dives into the benchmark assessment system and what's problematic about it. I mentioned the IRIS module already. Again, a great walk you through the steps from beginning to end of trying to monitor a student's progress in reading. So that'd be a great place to go back to if you want to learn more about this topic in more depth. The National Center on Intensive Intervention has some amazing tool charts. They've already reviewed the research on tools like Acadience, like Easy CBM, like the FastBridge tools. And they've looked at things like validity, reliability, sensitivity to change, classification accuracy. And they've outlined, they have it for screening tools for academics. They have it for progress monitoring tools for academics. They also have it for behavior tools as well. And then you've got several websites that are just going to dig more broadly into MTSS or RTI. So they have information about assessments, but they also have information about interventions and just structuring supports in your school. And that very last one on the list is the Evidence-Based Intervention Network out of University of Missouri. Again, this one, it doesn't have as much assessment information right now, though I think it's a work in progress, but they have tons of intervention information on there for reading, but other areas as well. and they've got some that are freely available. You can literally dig into an intervention, be able to implement it. They've got some great demo videos on there, and then they also have information about some interventions you'd have to purchase. So again, lots and lots of resources there. Again, in the handout, the last couple slides, you'll be able to actually use these as clickable links so that you can access all these great resources. So, okay, I think I saw.
Yeah, there's a couple in there.
Yeah, I saw the last few that got posted. If I missed one sooner, let me know. But I see Hannah's question. Are there multiple forms of DIBELS, for an example, for beginning, middle, end of the year assessment? Yes. So DIBELS, I think they have similar numbers, but I'll give Acadians as an example. Acadians has different measures for the beginning, the middle of the year assessments. And then they also have 20 equivalent forms for each tool so that you can use it for progress monitoring. So that means that you could monitor a student's progress 20 times, right, on oral reading fluency at a given grade level or nonsense word fluency, and screen them 3 times a year and not see the same story or the same measure repeated. So again, you've got 20 equivalent forms from Acadians. I think DIBELS might be similar. It's 15 to 20, I think, for them. I'm not sure how many the others offer, but yes, they've been designed for that purpose. They want to have a wide variety of equivalent forms for you so you have screening and you have equivalent forms also for progress monitoring. So.
Right.
The question I see Elizabeth.
Yeah, there was a question.
Yes.
It's an odd question.
Okay.
From Ingrid, you focus on curriculum and what happens in schools in the US. My gut says that use these no matter where you are in the world, but there is always talk about, but in Canada, we should use grade level lower. Thoughts?
Oh, interesting. Well, the curriculum-based measures, they come with published, target goals. And I do think many of them are probably based on United States samples. But that being said, I've definitely seen a few school districts that have want to use local data. So you could still use the published tools at the given grade level, but you could utilize maybe your own local data and set your own kind of target research goals. Again, you're kind of varying things a little bit. But if you wanted to say, no, based on the way we teach students, they really are only going to reach this many words correct per minute, you could consider utilizing some local norms. Again, creating your own norms is a lot of work, which is why I like that these tools have done all the work for you, but you could consider using local norms as well. So I see Elizabeth's question about nonsense word fluency. Is a student able to get the word correct if they sound it out? It depends on the tool, right? And kind of what the specific scoring rules are. For Acadians, in particular, they can get points. You get 2 scores with nonsense words, which is 1 score for correct letter sound. So even if they sound it out, they can get all those points. But that whole words read score from the examples I gave today, that one, they have to read it all together perfectly one time and only one time. They can't even repeat themselves to get that point. So it is a harder score. But it is going to vary. Nonsense word fluency for DIBELS might have different scoring rules than nonsense word fluency for Acadian. So again, that's why I couldn't get into all the logistics, because it is going to vary by publisher and by tool. So type of diagnostic assessments to dig into comprehension. I tend to do a lot more with kind of kindergarten, first and second grade personally. So I'm trying to think, I don't know if I know of any diagnostics for comprehension off the top of my head. If you want to email me, I can see if I can dig anything up for you, but off the top of my head, I don't know any. So if anyone has a great diagnostic for comprehension, throw it into the chat for Lindsay, and it looks like related to Don's question. Spelling CBMs. Yes, there are some spelling CBMs out there. That National Center for Intensive Intervention has CBMs for reading, math, spelling you can access. So they do have ones out there for different areas. If you teach and want to look at other CBM tools, they do exist for some other skills that we didn't talk about today. So the comprehension CBMs, I did give a couple of examples in the table chart. So go back to for the comprehension ones, Valerie. Awesome.
What are your thoughts on morpheme magic?
I'm not familiar with morpheme magic off the top of my head. So, okay. Someone, it looks like Donnie, you mentioned Cubed for comprehension as a diagnostic tool.
Yeah, I think it's
okay.
I think it's normed.
Okay, awesome.
I just learned about that one, and I think it's free.
Yeah. Yeah, the comprehension piece, I see Don brings up the comprehension for, CBMs for comprehension. It is definitely a sticking point, I think, for people. As a first level, I love looking at the Acadians has the oral reading fluency, and the students have to do a retell immediately after. So it looks at how many words can the student retell related to the story. So that's kind of a good first quick check. It's not the best, most comprehensive assessment of comprehension, in my opinion, but it's a great check. If you use that in combination with the maze assessment, which is really designed to assess comprehension as well, I think both those pieces combined really do give you at least a basic understanding for screening and progress monitoring where a student's comprehension is at. Again, that being said, this is not going to tell you everything you need to know, because that's not what they're designed to do. But I think that is an oral reading fluency is not designed to turn students into speed readers. So, right, it's designed to, we want to assess if students have the necessary level of fluency so that then their brain power can be freed up enough to focus on comprehension. So I definitely see some people who are really against oral reading fluency because they think it's just turning students into speed readers, and that's not what it's designed to do. We don't want students, the directions don't say read as fast as you can. They say do your best reading, right? Be ready to tell me all about the story when you finish. So that really is kind of a nuanced difference there, but definitely a reaction I've seen from other districts as well. So yeah, comprehension is affected by a lot of different things. It is hard to, again, get a really, really good CBM measure for comprehension. But I think, the lower levels, those scores are so predictive of later reading outcomes. Even if you started it kind of lower, in kindergarten through second grade, you're really not going to be getting into some of those comprehension measures for CBMs, at least right now, but they provide really useful data to help you figure out early years which kids are on track and which kids do we intervene with now. So the NWEA map, that's an interesting one. Brian, I'm not a huge fan of the NWEA. The data there, I feel like, are also, they're just really hard, I feel like, for teachers to interpret. The scores are really not parent friendly either. And that one is computerized, if I remember right. I'm pretty sure the NWEA map is computerized. And honestly, you're not going to see a ton of computerized CBM assessments out there, because it's not as direct a measure of student skills, rather than actually having the student actually read or listen, right, and respond. And I think it brings in too much room for just random guessing, right? I've seen too many first graders who just click, 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 even with the best monitor trying to manage students. I think a lot of schools like it because they can minister to a huge group of students at the same time. But I do question about the accuracy of some NWEA data. So personally not a fan, but others may disagree. Yeah, the NWA map, I think they definitely market themselves as a screener and a progress monitoring tool. I'm not sure that they call themselves a curriculum-based measure specifically, but they are a screener and progress monitoring tool. The interesting thing you'll find about assessments is that even if assessment has the word screener in the title, that doesn't necessarily mean it was actually researched and is established as a screener. And so you kind of have to look at is it standardized? How long does it take, right? Is it really is it something that can be repeated over time? Or does the assessment change every period to really think about, is this a curriculum-based measure that can be used for screening and monitoring progress? Or is this something that's going to really is not as standardized, but can really dig deeper into students and give much more detailed information, and therefore takes a lot more time? So I want to respect people's time too, Donna, because we're past 8 now. So.
Okay.
I see. And one more. After Acadians, what's next, right? Teachers are not sure how to support students. Yeah. Acadians or other CBM measures are, right, that's your screener, and assessment is just one piece of your school-wide, right, literacy model. You have to have your tier 1 instruction, ideally that's evidence-based, right, to support student skills. And then if you have students that are flagged by your screener, you may want to follow up with diagnostic assessments on some of those kids if you feel like you need additional data. Otherwise, you can use things like those Acadians grouping worksheets or other tools to help group your students. These are the students that struggled with fluency. These are the students who struggled with decoding. to help you at least initially think about which instructional groups you might need and help you identify kids who are really far behind, and maybe you need additional resources in your school to provide interventions for those students beyond your regular classroom instruction. But I know resources are hard to come by these days. So
I have one question too.
yes.
How do you convince schools to drop BAS? And
yeah, it's hard. The very first time I did this presentation in a school district here in Michigan, it was years ago. Gosh, maybe 8-9 years ago, we did a presentation much more abbreviated than this, really kind of simple. And we tried to come at it from all angles. We had school psychs who were totally already on board, right? But they were new. And they brought in their curriculum director, they brought in their reading specialist, they brought in all these people. And we did this great presentation. They're like, thank you very much. And then nothing happened. Nothing changed. They continued to use F&P levels. I did just check in with one of those school psychologists. Actually, I just texted her today to say, hey, I'm thinking about you today. And when I did that presentation, and she said, we actually gave up F&P levels a couple of years ago. And I was like, it took several years. It did take in, she said, a big thing that happened is they had a new reading specialist come in who was very much in line with, the training the school psychologist had, knew the benefit of curriculum-based measures. So I think in that district, it was simply waiting out maybe the people who had the power and getting some new people in there. I know that they piloted it with a smaller group of students. I think they started with kindergarten. They piloted it and compared it to some of the data they already had, and they compared it to how much instructional time it took. So I think they kind of tried to start small and try it with a smaller group of students to maybe show as an example or an exemplar of why they might want to do that at other times of the year and for other grade levels. And I believe they're doing it. I don't know if they're doing it all the way K-6, but I know they're doing K-2 now in that district. And 8 years ago, it seemed like it was an absolute no-go. There was no way they were going to change.
Yeah,
so
change is slow for sure.
It is slow. It is so. Systems change. The research on system change says it takes 5 to 7 years to change a system. So keep fighting the good fight. Hopefully, again, I gave you some great talking points today. And again, some of these additional resources will be helpful to you. But again, you have my email address here and it's on the first page of the handout. Please feel free to email me if you have additional questions or want to follow up with some other resources.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much. Very
no problem.
good.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. I want to remind everyone that next Monday, we are meeting with Dr. Matt Burns, and he's going to talk about phonemic awareness and the truths and the myths. So it should be very, very good. Okay, thanks so much and have a great evening. Go take care of those babies.
I will. Thanks, Donna. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.